If I told you the average Canadian RRSP balance at 65 is over $200,000, would you believe me? Don't answer yet, because that number is hiding something the banks don't really want you thinking too hard about. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where you actually stand. Hit subscribe before we get into it, because these numbers change how you should be handling your money starting today, and you deserve the real picture, not the marketing version. Let's be honest about why you clicked on this video. You've probably typed some version of "how much should I have saved by now" into a search bar at least once, late at night, maybe right after your banking app sent you a notification that made your stomach tighten a little. You're not alone in that. Almost every Canadian does this quietly, compares themselves to some invisible standard, and then closes the tab feeling worse than before they opened it. That ends today. We're going to walk through exactly what Canadians actually have in their RRSPs at 45, at 55, and at 65, using real data, not guesswork. And I promise you, the full picture is more encouraging and more useful than the scary headline numbers you've probably already seen floating around. Here's the first thing you need to understand before a single number means anything to you. And it's the thing almost nobody explains properly. There are two very different numbers hiding inside every one of these statistics, the average and the median, and the gap between them is enormous. The average, sometimes called the mean, adds up everyone's RRSP balance and divides it by the number of people. Sounds fair, right? Except a small group of very high earners with massive account balances drags that number way, way up, making it look like everyone is doing better than they actually are. The median, on the other hand, is the person standing exactly in the middle. Half of Canadians have more, half have less. That's the number that actually reflects what a typical person, like you, is dealing with. And once you understand that difference, the entire conversation around retirement savings starts to make a lot more sense. So let's start at 45, because if you're in your mid-40s right now, this is often the age where the panic really sets in. You're deep into your career, maybe raising kids, maybe helping aging parents, maybe still carrying a mortgage, and retirement suddenly doesn't feel like some distant abstract idea anymore. It feels like it's actually coming. According to Statistics Canada's survey of financial security, the typical, or median Canadian in this stage of life has an RRSP balance somewhere in the range of $30,000 to $70,000, depending on exactly where in that decade they fall. Meanwhile, the average balance reported in the same data is closer to $80,000 to $90,000. See that gap already? If you're sitting there with $40,000 saved and you just saw a headline saying the average Canadian has $90,000, I want you to, because you are not behind the typical Canadian. You might be exactly on pace or even ahead of most people your age. The people pulling that average number upward are a relatively small slice of high-income earners, and comparing your life to theirs is like comparing your grocery bill to a restaurant owner. Different game entirely. Now, here's something I need you to keep in the back of your mind because it's going to matter a lot in a minute. There is a specific decade in a person's working life where the gap between the median saver and the comfortable saver widens faster than at any other point, and it's not the one most people assume. I'll tell you exactly which decade that is and why it happens, but first, let's move to age 55, because this is where things get genuinely interesting. By 55, most Canadians are in their peak earning years. The kids, if there are any, are often more independent. The mortgage might finally be shrinking instead of just sitting there. And this is usually the decade where people start seriously asking themselves, am I actually going to be okay? The data here tells a story worth paying attention to. The median RRSP balance for Canadians in the 55 to 64 age range sits right around $100,000. The average, pulled upward by those higher balance households, climbs to somewhere between $200,000 and $220,000. That's more than double the median. Let that sink in for a second. If you're 55 years old with $100,000 in your RRSP, you are sitting right at the typical Canadian benchmark, even though every article you've probably read made you feel like you should have double that. This is exactly why comparing yourself to average numbers instead of median numbers can quietly wreck your confidence for no good reason. But here's the honest, slightly uncomfortable truth I owe you, because I'm not here to just make you feel good and send you on your way. Even that median number, $100,000 at 55, is genuinely on the low side for what most financial planners would consider a comfortable, fully self-funded retirement. Many planners suggest aiming for something closer to 6 or 7 times your annual income by this stage of life, if your RRSP is going to be your main source of retirement income. So if you're behind that benchmark, you're in the company of the vast majority of Canadians. But that doesn't mean the gap doesn't matter. It means this is exactly the decade to close it, because you still have roughly 10 working years left where compound growth and catch-up contributions can do some real heavy lifting. And now, the curiosity loop I promised you, that decade where the gap between the median saver and the well-prepared saver widens the fastest, it's not your 20s and it's not your 60s. It's your 50s. Here's why. Your 50s are usually your single highest earning decade, which means your unused RRSP contribution room from all those earlier years when you couldn't afford to max it out finally becomes useful. Many Canadians carry tens of thousands of dollars of unused contribution room by their 50s without even realizing it. The average unused room sits close to $95,000 per person. If you contribute a large lump sum in a high-income year, you're not just saving for retirement, you're also generating a serious tax refund in the same year, sometimes well into 5 figures. That refund, reinvested, compounds again. This is the single most underused strategy sitting quietly in most Canadians' financial lives, and almost nobody explains it to them in plain language. Now let's talk about 65, the number everyone really clicked on this video to see. Here's where it gets almost strange. The data shows that the median RRSP balance for Canadians 65 and older barely moves from where it sat at 55. It stays right around $100,000. But the average jumps up to somewhere around $220,000 to $225,000. Why does the median basically flatline? Because by 65, most people have either already retired or just starting to, which means contributions slow way down and withdrawals begin. The people driving that higher average are the households who kept contributing aggressively, invested well, and often have other income sources on top of their RRSP. Workplace pensions, rental income, business ownership. For the typical retiree, though, the RRSP is just one piece of a bigger puzzle that includes CPP, OAS, and whatever else they've managed to put aside. And that's completely normal. Here's the payoff you've been waiting for, and I think it's going to genuinely change how you feel about where you stand. If you looked at those big, scary average numbers earlier and felt like a failure, I need you to hear this clearly. The typical Canadian, the actual median person your age, likely has far less saved than those headlines suggested. And they are still going to be okay, because retirement in this country was never designed to run on RRSP savings alone. CPP and OAS together provide a meaningful floor of guaranteed, inflation-adjusted income for life, no matter what the stock market does. Your RRSP is meant to supplement that, not replace it entirely. Feeling behind the average is not the same thing as being behind. You are very likely closer to on track than the headlines want you to believe. That said, and I want to be straight with you here, typical and sufficient are two different words. Being right at the median doesn't automatically mean you're financially set. It just means you're normal. And normal, for many Canadians, still comes with real financial stress in retirement. So if today's numbers made you a little uneasy, let that feeling become fuel instead of shame. Whether you're 45, 55, or 65, the most powerful thing you can do right now is figure out exactly how much unused RRSP contribution room you're sitting on. Because there's a real chance it's larger than you think, and using even a portion of it, especially during a high-income year, can quietly reshape your retirement timeline. Let's talk for a second about why this gap between average and median even exists in the first place, because understanding the mechanics behind it will change how you read every financial headline for the rest of your life. RRSPs offer a tax deduction on the way in. Contribute money now, and you shrink your taxable income for that year. That means the RRSP is disproportionately attractive to higher income earners, because a deduction is worth more to someone in a higher tax bracket than to someone in a lower one. Someone earning a much higher salary saves thousands more in tax on the exact same contribution than someone earning a modest income. So naturally, higher earners lean into RRSPs harder, contribute larger amounts, and their balances snowball faster through decades of compounding. That's not a flaw in the system, it's just math. But it does mean the average Canadian RRSP balance you see quoted in the news is really being pulled upward by a relatively small, high-income slice of the population, and it was never an accurate mirror for most people to begin with. I also want to gently push back on one more myth while we're here, because it trips people up constantly. A lot of Canadians assume that if their RRSP balance looks low for their age, they've failed at retirement planning entirely. But your RRSP is only one account in a much bigger toolkit. Many Canadians are also building up a tax-free savings account, contributing to a workplace pension plan, paying down a mortgage that will eventually become a paid-off asset worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, or running a small business that itself functions as a retirement asset. None of that shows up in the RRSP number alone. So before you let a single statistic define how you feel about your financial life, take stock of everything you're actually building, not just the one account that happens to get all the headlines. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, but what do I actually do with this information? Here's the honest, practical answer. If you're in your 40s, the priority is usually building the habit of consistent contributions, even small ones, because time is still your biggest advantage, and compounding needs decades to really show its power. If you're in your 50s, the priority often shifts to catching up using unused contribution room during your highest income years, squeezing every available tax refund back into your investments. And if you're approaching 65, the conversation shifts again toward how you'll actually draw that money down in a way that minimizes tax and works alongside CPP and OAS instead of against them. Because taking large RRSP withdrawals carelessly can sometimes push your income high enough to trigger the OAS clawback, quietly costing you money you didn't expect to lose. You've worked hard for every dollar that's gone into that account, and you deserve to actually understand where you stand, instead of guessing based on scary headlines designed to get clicks. If this video gave you a clearer, calmer picture of your own numbers, that's exactly why this channel exists, to cut through the noise and give it to you straight. So subscribe right now, because we're going to keep breaking down exactly what these financial milestones really mean for real Canadians, not just the wealthiest 10% skewing every average you see online. And if you know someone in their 40s, 50s, or 60s who's been quietly stressing over their own RRSP balance, send them this video. You might be the reason they finally stop comparing themselves to a number that was never really about them in the first place.